Hi, and welcome to the first webinar in our Positive Safety Experience series, Key Levers to Enable Positive Safety Experiences. So thank you for joining us. We've had a great response to registration for this webinar series. As a reminder, this is the first in a three-part webinar series. So if this is an area of passion or interest for you in your organisation, feel free to sign up to the additional 2 webinars. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can join Dr. Vanessa, my colleague on the screen here, in our community to dig and dive further into these ideas and concepts. So firstly, Vanessa, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, wonderful to be here. Thanks.
So we'll kick into the detail of the webinar in just a moment. Firstly, wanted to recognise that today is Are You OK Day. So, great opportunity, great nudge for all of us to pick up the phone and check in on a loved one or a colleague or someone we haven't spoken to for some time and just see how they're going. To move forward, though, we'll kick off by doing a quick acknowledgement of country. This is acknowledging our country and acknowledging the land on which we're working on is a really important part of, I guess, being part of Australia and being part of Sentis. We ourselves have a strong connection to land through the conservation work that we do down in northern New South Wales. So we'd just like to take this time to have everyone reflect and acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands throughout Australia that we all are working and living and playing on today, and have a reflection about our own and their connection to land, waters and community. We'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners of the land on which we meet today across the country and pay respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be here with us today. And again, we do this because it's a very valuable part of our history, and we really do value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture and knowledge. For those of you who aren't familiar with Sentis, Sentis has been around for about 22 years. Our focus is on applying psychology and neuroscience to improving the safety of organisations and individuals for the better. Our mission is to change the lives of individuals and the organisations for the better every day. And we're very proud of the work that we do, and we hope that the information that we share today helps you to change your life for the better and change the lives of the people that you lead for the better as well. So we'll kick off this session. I'll hand over to Vanessa about just take a bit of time to set the scene about why we're talking about positive safety, and I guess even some of the thinking or rationale about this alternative approach to safety. So Vanessa, over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. So I wanted to start off talking about the paradigm shift that has happened in psychology, because the shift we've seen in safety over time very much mirrors this paradigm shift in psychology. And for those that don't know, Ant and I are both actually psychologists who have psychology in our background. So we're kind of very familiar with this territory. And historically, psychology was very much born from a disease model. So it focused on mental illness, disease and dysfunction. There was very much a predominant focus on the negatives of the human psyche and what goes wrong rather than what goes right. And you could say that the aim of therapy or analysis back then is really aiming to decrease the dysfunction and get people back to sort of a baseline of normal functioning. Over time, and I mean, it's actually a bit telling of my age, I remember when the positive safety movement actually came into being. I bet you probably do too, Ant. So it was somewhere around 1998. That was just a smidge before I started my doctoral degree. And we have some of the greats like Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. There's a bit of a mouthful of a last name. Some of these greats in positive psychology began this movement, which was about expanding the focus of psychology to understand what makes life worth living. So it studied conditions that contribute to human flourishing, resilience, happiness, and optimal functioning. So what are the building blocks for people to really be thriving beyond that, just getting by, 0 point? So it's going beyond treating illness to particularly using strengths and other factors that enable individuals and communities to thrive. And so we've seen a very similar progression and evolution in safety, where I'm sure all of us on this call would remember traditional safety, which was largely reactive. So reacting to safety incidents or worsening safety metrics, very much centered on compliance, often used with a command and control type of approach. And the focus is on eliminating the negatives, such as incidents, injuries, and violations. Often there was, in investigations, incident investigations, almost unfailingly, it would drill down to a human error at the cause. So human error was seen as key causes of failures. And the primary goal of traditional safety is really to achieve an absence of harm measured by lag indicators. So we have come a long way, and we can see that we're starting to evolve into a positive approach to safety. And this is where we're moving beyond preventing harm, which absolutely that's still and always going to be an important aspect of safety. But we want to move beyond that to create environments where safety is an integral part of the organizational culture. So there's emphasis on understanding safety as a holistic experience. You know, safety is not just about physical safety anymore. There's psychosocial safety. There's actually a social and a psychological experience within safety as well. So we focus on the presence of safety rather than just the absence of incidents. And by taking this approach, we're more likely to achieve autonomous motivation, which I'll unpack in detail in just a little bit. But this is where people are not just complying because they have to, but they actually want to invest in safety. They really get it. They see why it's important. They want to do it for their own reasons. And therefore, we don't just get compliance, we get people contributing, sharing ideas, etc. So if we were to put, what positive safety is about in a nutshell, it would be a statement like this. Now, there's a lot of words there on the screen. I'm going to highlight and dive into the key components of this. So positive safety is proactive rather than just reactive, and it has that positive focus. So rather than just trying to minimize the negatives, we're actually looking for the positives and learning from what's working, not just what's broken. We see safety as an enabler of a positive culture. So safety is not just a compliance obligation, but it's something that can actually improve culture in all aspects. We focus on the safety experience. So again, it's not just physical safety, it's social and psychological safety as well. And we understand that all of those dimensions of safety are connected and interrelated, and they actually impact each other. And with these components, this is where we have safety driving motivation and discretionary effort. And that's really the place we want to be. That's the goal. So, and speaking to a lot of our clients and people in industry, I think that we're at a time now where everyone gets it. Like, people are on board with this philosophy, but shifting out of that more traditional approach to safety into a positive safety approach it's kind of easier said than done. Why is that, Ant?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I mean, we talk about positive safety and what are the underlying drivers and how do we get people to think differently about safety? We're talking here about HOP, safety differently. These are all things that are talking about taking a more positive approach to safety. Looking at lead indicators or looking at the presence of capacity. And people go, yeah, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. But still, we're having trouble flipping over and adopting some of these approaches in the work that we do. So we might move to the next slide, Vanessa, because this is my opportunity to nerd out for just a little bit. But it's just interesting to sort of unpack, what's going on in people's brains, what's some of the heuristics which are actually driving certain types of behaviors to continue to pop up over and over and over and over again. So what we know is that our brains register social and physical threat in very similar ways. If I experience a physical threat or a social threat, my brain reads that and I feel a particular way around that. Same thing with physical reward and social rewards. I feel that and I experience that and I connect with that in a particular way. But there are certain things around the way that our brains work in relation to safety and culture, which means that it's actually much easier to hit the threat button in people's brains than it is to hit the reward button in people's brains. And as a result, a lot of the drivers and the way that we motivate people around safety tends to fall into the threat bucket. And as we're going to talk about in just a moment, when you unpack motivation in more detail, Vanessa, it's not necessarily the greatest quality of motivator. It's like the difference between putting dodgy fuel in your car versus high octane fuel in your car in terms of the sorts of behaviors and momentum that it drives. So the couple of psychological principles I just wanted to tap on really quickly here are firstly negativity bias. So innate in all of our brains is this idea of a negativity bias, which leads us to focus more on negative events and behaviors and outcomes than positive ones. And there's a little bit of survival wired into this. Often our brains are on the search, on the lookout for things that are dangerous, either physically or socially to us, so that we can see those things that are hazards and manage them effectively. Now, you would think that would play out well for safety, right? That, oh, well, if that's how our brain's fired to look for the risk, then surely our brains are looking out for risk to manage personal physical safety on the daily basis. However, what tends to happen is that over time, we will see other things as more risky than the risk itself. And a lot of that comes down to the social connection that we create in workplaces. So because of this negativity bias, we tend to naturally have an overemphasis on mistakes and failures. That's what our brains are on the lookout for: problems and challenges and issues that occur when something goes wrong with safety. Or even when we're walking around on site, our brains and our eyes are being more naturally drawn to what isn't working as opposed to what is working. That often will perpetuate in people experiencing a fear and blame culture. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that, well, I only normally hear about safety when something goes wrong or when there's a problem. And I guess what also amplifies this element is that when I experience either a positive or a negative interaction with someone, it's actually the negative interaction that sticks with me longer from a social brain perspective. So not only am I receiving more negative feedback around safety a lot of the time, the impact and experience of those is much stronger. And what that will sometimes tend to do is mean that we don't focus on the positives around safety, leading to a culture where I feel like safety is a bit of a big stick that's applied to me. The other interesting psychological principle I wanted to unpack is this idea of the fundamental attribution error. And this occurs when when we attribute other people's actions to their character or personality rather than external factors. So when something goes wrong or a mistake is made, we tend to be more likely to say, what were they thinking? Where if we were in the same situation and made the same mistake, we'd probably go, well, it wasn't my fault, or I wasn't set up for success. So, but this is human nature. This is how we're wired. So what this leads to is that we tend to, when an error occurs, go, well, how could they possibly do that? We've set them up for success and they're still doing silly things. And as a result, we tend to be less likely to look at ourselves and the organizational responsibilities that we have, and we reduce overall trust and morale across the work site. I saw this play out really in an interesting way with an organization where we're supporting them to look at their personal risk assessment tool. We've all got these, or many of us have got these within our organizations, Take Fives or whatever branding or language that you've got around it. And it's a huge start for a lot of organizations, because we've got this tool that we have deployed across organizations with the goal or the supposed intent to help people make better and safer choices around safety. However, we tend to have a bias. However, when someone doesn't use it and an incident occurs, we scratch our heads and go, well, why didn't they use the risk assessment tool that's come into place? Because of this, so when we actually unpack this particular organization's circumstance, we actually found that the tool itself was seen as a butt covering exercise by management. And the reason it was seen as a butt covering exercise by management is because no one was trained on it. There were no skills provided around it. It wasn't introduced as part of the induction process. It wasn't used as a conversational piece when leaders were out in the field, discussing safety with the workforce. However, when an incident occurred, the first question people were often asked was, can you show me where you completed the risk assessment tool? And if it wasn't done, rightly or wrongly, people perceived that you could be dismissed from your role. And when it was done, often they were corrected and told that it wasn't done right. So this tool that was once upon a time put into place with positive intent to help people stay safe, not only isn't doing the job of managing safety, because people are actually completing them only to cover their backsides from protecting their job rather than managing the risk, but is actually having an effect where it's creating cynicism throughout the workforce. So something that was put in place to create a positive safety culture often is actually creating a negative safety culture, disengaging people from safety and driving us in the wrong direction. Is that making sense, Vanessa?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we see this play out really regularly, right? And if we jump into the next slide, we've done, some of you who work with us a bit will have seen this slide before. Yeah, this is the factors from our research, 60,000 respondents, 100-odd organizations globally. These are the factors that we will typically see play out in a negative safety culture. This is how people experience the workplace when it comes to safety. People who work within these cultures say that that the quality of safety procedures isn't there, and there's often a lot of safety quality, and there's often an over-reliance on safety procedures. So something happens, we don't consult, we just roll out a whole new piece of paperwork. And then if you're not compliant with the paperwork, it's perceived that that is used as a way of correcting and challenging your behavior from a disciplinary standpoint. Safety management commitment is often shifting, changing, and not prioritized. Internal context relates to change management a lot of the time and shifting priorities. So again, in these organizations, people don't often know where they stand, what the North Star is, and what the goal of safety is. We tend to find that, again, another byproduct of this is that the willingness to report incidents and errors is reduced, and that is often because of a fear and blame culture that permeates through. And finally, organizations in these, people in these cultures often feel that employee safety performance recognition is poor. So they feel that they can do safely 99% of the time. They'll hear nothing from a leader, but if something goes wrong, then they get a whole lot of attention. So again, you can see how the fundamental attribution error, along with negativity bias, can play in and permeate really, really permeate throughout an organization, despite good efforts to create a negative safety culture. So the big, I guess, thing to call out here is, if we want to shift our culture, because of the way our brains are wired, it's going to take deliberate and conscious effort to do so. And we need to put frameworks and processes into place to support that. So if we hope it's going to happen, you're going to be waiting and hoping for a long time. So when we work with organizations, what we typically find is that organizations, one of the first things they need to work on is, what is the motivation around safety, and how do we create better quality motivation to drive different outcomes? Can you unpack a bit for us about, some of the research that we've done in the book and you've done around quality motivation?
Yeah, well, motivation is totally my jam. I find it so fascinating, and it's really important to be aware of what is driving the motivation of your people when it comes to safety. So this is a bit of a continuum, or a description of the different types of motivators here. And you can see that they sort of go from worst quality to best quality in the green. So sometimes people can actually have no motivation for safety. They're just not interested. They don't see the point, for instance, of, I don't know, wearing their safety gloves or something like that for particular tasks. Then one rung up, we get to external pressure for safety. So that's when I'll do what I'm required because I have to, because I either want to gain something like, be seen to be doing the right thing, or it's to avoid something I don't want. I don't want to be the next person getting a window seat, getting fired for not doing what I should be doing. Up from there in the orange, there's internal pressure for safety. So that means I don't really want to, but I know I have to. When I go through and think about these, I keep thinking about actually trying to motivate my children to do their homework. So they're about 10 and 12. And it's funny because I can really see this play out. I have one child that is the internal pressure. So she doesn't really like doing the homework at all, but she fears being embarrassed by not having homework to hand into the teacher. So she'll just get it done herself because she's wanting to avoid that shame and embarrassment. The other child, I have to get the whip out to do the homework, right? So that is external pressure for safety. I'm not going to do it unless I have to. So up from there, getting into the green, this is where we have some belief in safety. So we often talk about our PB5 concept. So I choose to be safe because I want to go home safe and sound to my kids. I want to, be able to engage in the things that are important to me. So it's my personal choice to engage in safety. Up from there, we have personal identification with safety. So this is where it's, I'm the sort of person who, so I'm the sort of person who acts safely because being, a professional is important to me. And I'm aware that I'm a role model and I influence the people around me. So that's where you see safety as a part of who you are. And then finally, up from there is intrinsic motivation for safety. Now, intrinsic motivation is when you do something just for the actual joy of it. Now, I'm not going to lie, not all of things in safety are going to drive intrinsic motivation. I've actually done some underground mine tours and things like that. And I can tell you it's pretty hard to be in full PPE, big heavy boots, hats on, all of this sort of the equipment in that sort of, confined dark space, hot space, So not all things we need to do to manage our safety is going to be intrinsically motivating. But there are elements of that. So for instance, when I share ideas and contribute to safety in a way that it makes things better for everyone, that gives me a bit of a sense of joy and pride. And, so that is something that drives intrinsic motivation. So this is the spectrum of motivational drivers. And what we can see here is that this external pressures for safety and internal pressures, so only doing things because I have to, that's what we call controlled motivation. So it's not out of my free will. It's because I either need to get the things that doing that will get me, or I'm avoiding some kind of negative. In the green end of the spectrum here, this is what we call autonomous motivation. So this is when we're choosing to do a particular thing or engage in safety out of my own free will because it's important to me. So having a look at that, I'd really invite you to reflect on what sort of motivation might be driving safety in your workplace. Often, particularly with that sort of more traditional approach to safety, it has been this controlled motivation. You need to do what you're told, follow the regulations, follow the procedures to the letter, etc. And what that does, if we have a workforce which is primarily driven by controlled motivation, then all we can get to is compliance. In order to get compliance plus discretionary effort, we want to get to that place where people really value safety, where they want to share ideas, they want to help improve things, they want to look out not only for themselves, but their mates and their colleagues. That's a discretionary effort, and we can only get there when people are autonomously motivated for safety. So, I think this is one of the most critical ingredients to think, how do we actually drive the right kind of motivation here? And just one other way to think about this really is controlled motivation. I often talk to that as being the junk food motivation, in that, look, it'll do the trick. You absolutely can motivate people to do something with junk food motivation, but it's not going to last long. And, have you ever thought about how you seem to be trapped in this culture where you have to micromanage people, you have to be supervising people, you have to be checking up? We can't get past that unless we get to this better quality of autonomous motivation. And so, how do we do that? How do we get into that different approach, really different style? Many of you will be familiar with our attitude, behaviors, results model. And this is, it's really simple. It's really just showing that our attitudes, the way we think and feel, are going to drive, pardon me, the behaviors that we engage in, and therefore the results that we get. Now, when it comes to safety or just about anything else in organizations, where do we tend to focus? We tend to focus on the results that we want to achieve and the behaviors we need to engage in to get there. And this is how we often get into that trap of telling people what to do. This is what we need. These are the behaviors we need to engage in so that we can get to this outcome. However, when we only focus on those, the behaviors and the results, and the attitudes of our people are not in alignment or not congruent with those behaviors we want to see from them, this is when we'll get superficial compliance. Yep, we get the yes ma'am, no ma'am, 3 bags full ma'am. We get people telling us yeah, but then when they're not being supervised, they're probably going to be doing something different. It's because there can be a lack of engagement there if we're not actually understanding the attitudes of our people and checking that they're in alignment with the behaviors they need to display to get those great results. Then people are not bought in. And so this over time can breed a bit of a resistance and blame culture. So that's not where we want to be. So we actually need to take a step back from behaviors and think about, what are the attitudes we want to see from our people? What are the attitudes that are going to naturally drive the right behaviors? So when we do focus on the attitudes aspect and get some of that autonomous motivation happening, this is when people actually start to take ownership and responsibility for safety. And again, not just for their own benefit, but they want to see everyone go home safely. And this is how we get to a more resilient safety culture. So it's really fueling that autonomous motivation by influencing those right attitudes in our workforce. So it is a bit of a shift there, from going just focusing on behaviors and results to taking a step back and thinking, how do we drive the right sort of attitudes? When we do see this shift starting to happen in organizations, and how does that show up in the research?
Yeah, so what we've, again, going back to the same research that I looked at with you in the previous section, not only did we look at what are the drivers of a negative safety culture, but we've also unpacked what are the drivers of a positive safety culture. So this is real data from organizations that have been able to break through that public compliance space, move into private compliance or collaborative style cultures. So the common themes that we see come out of those higher performing organizations are, firstly, that they have a clear mission and vision around safety. So they've, at the top of the organization, they've set expectations in a way which is motivating and engaging. Now, it's funny with this one, V, and I'll talk about it in a real life example in a minute. Often it's seen as a bit soft and fluffy. But when it kind of starts to make sense that if you only get what you can, if you can only get to what you aim for, you need that vision. So if you only set your culture, say, hey, we want to create compliance, we want to police compliance, that's all you can really ever hope to get to. So this is often an aspirational vision that organizations want to aim for. When you've got a vision that's clear, a lot of these organizations will then focus on aligning their leadership team to that vision and giving them the skills and the capability to actually lead in line with that vision and mission that's been set. So, we see more internally locused leaders in these organizations who are taking ownership of their 50%. We also see leaders that act more consistently, behave more consistently, and promote safety in line with that safety vision and mission. This tends to have byproducts of fostering better within team communication, because if we go back to your positive experience model from before, we're normally not only focusing on physical safety, but we're also focused very heavily on creating social and psychological safety in such a way that we promote people to speak up, share information. And you'll notice that underreporting isn't an issue in these organizations because that data is getting to the places that it needs to get to. Again, more byproducts and focus on individual responsibility for safety. And we tend to see less pushbacks to initiatives and projects as a result of this. So if we move to the next slide, very interestingly, our research lines up really tightly with what the literature says the drivers of a positive safety culture are. And we've developed these 8 principles of positive safety that we generally use to help guide organizations in creating a more positive safety culture. For today's session, I wanted to zero in on 3 particular foundations of safety transformation: vision, database decisions, and building a strong foundation, because it's easy to skip some of these steps. But if you can line these 3 steps up and get them moving well, you really are setting your project up for success. So we might move actually now into a real life example of how an organization has implemented these elements so that we can sort of bring some of this to life for people. Now, this is an impact study that we did in collaboration with Unity Water, a client that I personally have worked very closely with for a number of years. Keenan and the team there are very committed to creating a positive safety culture. And you can actually read about it in our book if you want to dive into this particular study in more detail. Now, in the book, it's really interesting, when you talk to Keenan, if he winds back the clock in safety and safety culture, he says, when I first joined this business 10 years ago, we were heavily focused on injury management and rehabilitation. So it was nearly that ambulance at the bottom of a cliff stuff. So we're going to reduce our lost time injury frequency rates by managing injuries and incidents better. They then started to evolve into more of a proactive focus on safety. So they were trying to get to zero by eliminating risks. And it was a heavy focus on the physical environment. But then as time evolved and as kind of safety thinking sped up, the focus shifted again. So we started to ask ourselves, how could we start to create an environment where people think and act and behave in ways that are actually safe, and they feel like they're valued and appreciated by the organization, and that we genuinely have a common interest in keeping them safe. So you can sort of see here that not only is it about the organization's motivation shifting, it's about the executive's motivation towards safety shifting. And that's a motivation that started out at the top of that organization from the board. And really, the board and the executive team there have been quite collaborative in thinking about the sort of safety culture that they want to create. So Unity Water came and had a yarn to us and said, look, we know that there's opportunity for change here. We could be doing a heck of a lot of things better. Can we do some work with you to look at how do we approach this in a practical way that we can communicate to our people where the stucks are, where the opportunities are, and we can have a very methodical process of shifting culture. So said, yep, sure, we can help you with that. We'll start by benchmarking and looking at, where the strengths and weaknesses of that benchmark are. And look, they were disappointed with their initial culture results. They came out as having a counterproductive safety culture across their organization. So when we dig into their results in the next slide, you can see the drivers of their current safety culture mapped out. And these are the things we typically look at sort of measuring as some of the key levers that businesses can look at in terms of shifting that dial. So we sat down with the board, we sat down with the executive team, we said, look, these are your results. You've got the red dots aren't great. There's opportunities for improvement there, and the orange ones are very much about compliance. There's not a lot in private compliance or collaborative or citizenship. So they're the things where you've got that higher quality motivation. So Keenan and the team, being very practical people that they are, said, well, it's pretty clear we need to move the red dots first, and then we need to focus on strategic yellow dots and try and shift them into the grey. So they set a vision for the business. They put together a plan on a page, and they got about their work, getting it done. If we move to the next slide, V, we can sort of start to see some of the results that started to play out. So you can see the left-hand versus the right-hand results here. So you can see 2019 versus 2022, and they're doing another survey with us at the moment. So the way they tackled this and they drove these particular outcomes is they firstly, as I mentioned, changed their focus and their vision at the top of the organization. And then they looked at the data to see, all right, well, what are the dollars that we need to move to be able to realize that vision of, really demonstrating care and getting that discretionary effort from our people. So they went and asked the workforce, they consulted, and they got that information. And then they identified the building blocks that were going to be required to set their people up for success, their leaders up for success, and an organization up for success. And they really transparently shared their results. They went, hey, here's what's going on for us, warts and all. We would love you to jump on the court because we want to create a better place, a better and a safer place to work for everyone. So they shared it, they shared the vision, and then we ran some sessions that aligned leaders and team members to the new vision and gave them some skills, some thinking skills and some behavioral skills to start to realize that vision. And then the organization got about working on elements that it could do to contribute to creating a positive safety culture as well. So they start on the left, they move to the right, they get a step change in their safety results. And you will see on the next slide, what they were able to do is they were able to move from counterproductive to public compliance, and they're a whisker of private compliance. And I really hope and I suspect that for the next survey results, we'll be pushing into that private compliance space for them, which is an amazing result for any organization to achieve. So we then worked with them and we're going, all right, well, what's the tangible impact that's had on the organization? What is the safety data, the more traditional safety data telling us? And the results are amazing. You can see here, by moving the culture and by focusing on key areas and key levers within the business, they're able to reduce recordable incidents by 7.5%. And look, they're already not super high. So that's a significant shift in metrics. They're able to increase near miss reporting by 7%. But probably the biggest win that we're able to achieve, or they were able to achieve, we just played our little part in it, was that nearly 35% reduction in SIF events. So SIF are serious injury and fatality events. So that means the big stuff that can kill us and permanently harm our people, they're able to reduce that by 35% by taking a very strategic focus on setting a good vision, looking at data, and then implementing incremental change.
It's amazing, isn't it?
So what they've now done, which is kind of really cool to think about, is they're going, well, if managing the big stuff is the most important thing, because what they've also found is that they manage the big stuff, the little stuff seems to get managed as a byproduct. They've also started shifting the focus of their metrics. They've moved from a more traditional lost time injury frequency rate focus to a high potential frequency rate focus. And just by shifting that focus, not only for the executive team, but for the board, and that took a little bit of work, there's actually been a whole new wave of trickle-down effect. because they've gone, all right, well, we're going to shift what we're going to do incident investigations on. So they've moved the focus of their incident investigations to high potential events, which means that they're running less incident investigations, but the quality is higher. And then from an organizational perspective, people are going, well, it makes sense that you'd be focusing on those things, because we don't want to be seriously injured or killed either. And they're more likely to get on board and have buy-in into that process. And because not every incident is investigated and run to ground, people don't feel like there's such a knee-jerk blame culture at play. So, this is a really good example of an organization that has set a vision, gone and got data, and they've continued to test and retest, get data every 6 to 12 months. What are people feeling? What's their safety experience look like? And they've just done little twists of the dial, little adaptations and little changes. Look, and that's all come in the face of COVID, which had a serious impact on a whole bunch of elements of their organization. It's also come with a whole lot of industry change and pressures in amongst all that. So I guess the key takeaway from all of that, Vanessa, is that, often if we run safety a bit like we run our business, set a vision, get good data, and make sure that we've got the building blocks for success in place, we can achieve pretty remarkable results pretty quickly.
I think the communication was a big part of that as well. And in terms of setting the vision and, coming up with this new strategic approach, I remember that they were brilliant at cascading that communication down, telling people why we're changing the way we do things, how it's going to be different, what we hope the impact will be. And that's really been a key in shifting that motivation. So like you said, rather than seeing incident investigations as almost a punishment, something scary and unnecessary, it's, oh, I get it. That's, I see that this is going to help us learn and become better. And this is actually protecting me, so it changes the quality of that motivation.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, big call out to that team. They've been amazing to work with their Lead to Shape and Switch on to Shape programs and their initiatives. But I think, again, it does bring to life that, culture isn't just soft and fluffy stuff. If we get the culture right, there are realistic byproducts from a safety and productivity perspective, as demonstrated in this particular study. So I guess for those people who are on the line who are sort of going, all right, well, how do I go about starting to think about applying this within our organization? What are some of the steps or considerations or questions that they could look at to start to bring this to life?
So I'm going to focus on these three key areas that we unpacked in that case example. So lead with vision. Now, these are a series of self-reflection questions, and there are actually just a few that are taken out of our book, so another shameless plug, but there's a whole lot in here. In the back section, there's a leader's playbook section, and that actually breaks down some of these reflection questions that are pitched to the board and senior leadership team, to right down to frontline leaders. And so the questions are a little bit different. So just consider these for a moment. And the way I would recommend you use these is actually get your leaders together and have these as discussion points. So leading with vision. Consider for yourself in your own head at the moment, do we have a clear safety vision? How does the vision inform our decision-making and cascade down to policies and procedures? And are the attitudes and behaviours of our leaders and the policies and, policies, procedures and priorities of our organisation congruent with our vision? So in order for people to buy into the vision, it has to be inspiring and relevant, but there needs to be congruence between the way that we operate and that vision. So little things to consider there. The next one, making data-based decisions. So consider, does the data we track match our strategic objections? Are we tracking the right data to drive us in the direction we want to go? You might consider, what's the behavioural impact of the data we track? and communicate to the organization? Does it support a culture of learning and improvement? Sometimes the data we track can inadvertently have negative behavioral repercussions. LTI data can be a little bit like that kind of ant, because when people they're involved in an incident, all of a sudden, we've heard about horror stories when the board is reset to 0 and now we're starting from day 1 of an incident free. That can, what does that do? It drives people to shove things under the carpet. I do not want to be that guy that sets the counter back to 0, right? So we have to be really careful about what data, what metrics we collect and communicate through the business. And how can we use data to understand the attitudes and drive a positive safety culture? And finally, building a strong foundation. As Anne talked about, it's thinking about, do we have the right safety systems, equipment, and resources required to manage our critical risks and also drive a positive safety culture? And do our leaders have the skills, capability, and capacity, so that means time and resources, to engage and motivate a positive safety mindset? So these are just some of the key reflection questions I'd really encourage you to take to your leaders and have a good discussion about these, because they can really bring a lot of insights. Yeah, it's highly useful to do that. So this discussion actually doesn't finish here, and I can see, I'm so happy to see the chat going off in the background over here on my other screen. There's some of you with some great reflections and some really good questions. We will try to get to some of those questions at the end of this session. However, if we don't get to all of your questions, we invite you to come back to our positive safety community. So our community now has, we've ticked over 500 members, so we're into the 500s now, which is really awesome. We have a great thriving vibe in there. So people are bringing their questions, their queries, their success stories into this environment and sharing it there. So this, as Ant mentioned at the start, this is the first in a set of 3 webinars that will be rolling out. And our challenges and our meetups within the community are going to be connected to this. So our positive safety community is essentially our community of practice, where we're going to answer these sorts of questions in small groups where you can talk to each other, share ideas, and support each other's change journeys. So please do get your phone out and use that QR code if you're not already a member.
Just while people are doing that, I have put a couple of notes in the chat. So there's been some requests come through around some more detail around our safety climate survey. So I'll put a link in there that can be found on our website. I've also put a link into our Driving a Positive Safety Culture study, where we had those stats come out. Both of those are useful resources if you're looking at exploring something like this within your organization, particularly the Driving a Positive Safety Culture resource. It's a big read, but there's some really good hints and tips in there, not only about how you can influence change, but good things to share with senior leadership teams to have some discussion points on in terms of how we're going against these, where do we think we're landing, starting to create a little bit of dissidence within our leadership teams. If we're having challenges getting momentum on these things, sometimes just telling isn't enough. Sometimes dropping ideas and enabling conversation to happen and create some dissidence is part of that change process that we can support leaders on. So those resources are there, they're free, and encourage you to jump on and use those should you like to.
Yep, fantastic. Now, our next month's webinar is actually going to be really exciting, because we will be able to gain an insight into an organisation that is having some great traction with positive safety. So we'll be speaking to Jan Marchant she's the GM of Health and Safety from Southeast Water. And so she's going to be sharing her experience of operationalizing some of these positive safety principles. I think that's going to be a great discussion, Ant.
It will be. Yeah. No, Jan's super passionate and very practical in her approach to things. So well worth a listen for, again, more transferring of theory into practice, I think.
Yeah, so please do, if you haven't registered for the whole series of webinars, please do jump on that because I think you'll really, it's so useful to be able to gain, peek under the hood and see how other people are actually doing it. And again, it's a large organization, so, they're doing some fantastic work there. So that will be one not to miss. And Ant, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, great. So last little nudge for people is the opportunity to pick up our leading positive safety book that V and I have co-authored. So we've had so many great clients and such a great opportunity to work with so many organizations. We thought we'd capture our insights and some of the theory that sits behind those insights in our leading a positive safety culture book. Probably the coolest thing about the book is we've had about 13 different organizations that we've worked with partner with us to not like look at, all right, well, this is the theory, this is how we've applied it within our own setting. So, some great, we think we've got some great insights to provide, but, we've also got some of our partner clients there who are so passionate about creating positive change, who've put their thoughts into this book, and it really does bring to life some of those examples and makes them quite practical. So if you're keen to jump on board with that, there's a discount code coming your way. You can jump on sentis.com.au to grab that book, or you can jump on Amazon. It is cheaper on sentis.com.au. We can't control the price on Amazon, weirdly enough. So if you do want to grab a copy, encourage you to jump on to the website and pick one up. Cool.
And I think this must be just about a first. We've got a few minutes at the end to actually get to some Q&A. Very exciting. Doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, look, I'm going to just, it's not so much a question, but a comment from Trevor. He's mentioned that he uses a top-down, bottom-up approach. I think there's huge benefit in that. And I think the benefit comes in the form of consultation. And when you run surveys or diagnostics like the ones that we've run, just asking people and getting their opinion is a form of, I guess, getting that information from the floor and being able to act on that. I think sharing the results of the survey is really crucial to close the loop on that. That can sometimes be a step that's missed. But the next step that I think is really, really powerful, and we're actually, I mentioned that personal risk assessment tool that we're reviewing. The organization, the GM of the site that we're working with there, really inspirational, is a really very inspirational lady. We're redesigning the tool and the process there, but we're doing that directly with the front line. And we're going to use those frontline leaders to help us deploy, frontline team members and unofficial leaders to help us deploy that and to keep that feedback loop going, which, it will take a little bit more time to roll out, but we think is going to get a much more practical outcome and a much more sustained outcome. So I agree, Trevor. I think focusing on top down and bottom up is really useful.
There's a great question, Ant, from Tanya. Do you have any suggestions to engage management at a senior level and gain their commitment to moving beyond a compliance level? This is a really good one, and actually in the book we've zeroed in on the need to do that. So we actually have that back section which focuses on that board and senior executive team first, and then the senior leaders, and then frontline, because it is really important. I think a lot of leaders have experienced that they may want to make some brilliant changes, but if they're not empowered by the leadership level above, they hit a brick wall. So getting those high levels on board is really important. How do you suggest they do that, Ant?
Look, I think there are probably two slightly different challenges to address, the board and the executive team. I think if you're a safety leader or it depends on what role you play in a team, I think finding advocacy within your executive team or your SLT, and hopefully an operational change agent, and not only running a solo race, but working with that person to shape the dialogue and get them to support you to influence within that group is really useful. I think sharing research and data giving opportunities for discussion and dissidence is useful. So a lot of organisations that we've worked with, and I shared it in the chat, use that positive safety resource within their executive teams, just to say, well, this is what the benchmarking data looks like. How do we think we're going? Let's have a chat about that. Is that where we want to be? Is that how we see ourselves? What impact is that having? So I think enabling the conversation to play out and using your, I guess, stronger advocates to help, I guess, push the agenda forward is a good way to start the conversation at the executive level. I think at a board level, board members are often part-time employees and they won't have as much probably time and focus on operational issues as the rest of us. So a lot of the time with the boards, it's about education, actually, open them up to training, investing time in there. I know Unity Water actually put their entire board through the Switch on the Shape program, Lead to Shape program. So they actually got them in the room, said, this is what we're doing from a behavioural perspective. And then there's a big conversation with the board about educating them about high potential frequency rates versus lost time injury frequency rates. And the board, as soon as they could understand the strategy and the rationale logic behind it, incredibly supportive group. And it really just propelled things on. So I think creating dissidence within the leadership team by sharing data is really important, and educating up is the other really important thing for boards as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Wonderful. Any other questions in the last couple of minutes? We've got.
I'm scrolling through the. Look, I've picked up a couple of email addresses to send some. We'll get some additional information through to you. In the meantime, look, I think we're nearly done, V. Vanessa, thank you for your insights today. It's been awesome. Appreciated your time.
Wonderful. It's been really fun. And again, please let's continue this discussion in the community where we can really get into some of these questions and topics.
Yeah, feel free to shout out to either of us on LinkedIn. We're pretty easy to find on there, but otherwise we'll see you in some of the upcoming webinars or in the community. Have a safe rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. See you.
Bye.